What's up, everyone? Matt Gajewski here. Back again talking college football. It is week 7, and we are talking the Thursday slate. We got 4 games, a full quad box of action. And before we get started, if you like this content, please consider subscribing or leaving a like. Those help a small channel like this a ton. If you've done that, thank you. It helps a ton. I really can't overstate that. And if you have any suggestions, games you want to hear about for later in the week, our Friday show is all requests. Let me know. I'll try to get to your game. Last thing, if you or somebody you know has a gambling problem, please call or text 1-800-GAMBLER. All right, mixture of conferences for this Thursday night. Let's begin in Conference USA. Louisiana Tech takes on Kennesaw State. 6.5-point favorite for the road team, and the total in the game is 46.5. First of all, you're seeing a lean under. Trepidation with the pace, yes. I have that as well. You have Louisiana Tech 55th in pace, Kennesaw State 26th. But neither of these teams is particularly pass heavy, so maybe that could reduce the pace a little bit. But really what we're focusing on is offensive inefficiency, defensive efficiency for both teams. So far, Louisiana Tech has had a pretty good run. They have a good showing against LSU in a loss. They hold LSU to 4.9 yards per play. Then they beat New Mexico State, Southern Miss, and UTEP. All those are pretty good teams. Some of them are limited offensively, but Southern Miss is a team we really like. New Mexico State had a beatdown win last week. So while this is pretty good for Louisiana Tech resume-wise, Kennesaw State is also impressed considering they're going through a coaching change. They lose to Wake Forest by 1 point, get crushed by Indiana as kind of expected, but then they beat Arkansas State and Middle Tennessee, putting more weight to that Arkansas State win than anything else. So coming into this game, injury-wise, both teams are fairly healthy. For Louisiana Tech, they've been without Jay Wilkerson through most of the year, Jonathan Dennis on the O-line, and Cedric Woods at defensive back. For Kennesaw State, it's really just Jaden Kelly at linebacker, at least among new injuries. So going to QB, Louisiana Tech has kind of been held back by their quarterback position, and it's kind of just an entire offensive problem. But Blake Baker has a 63% completion percentage, 8.2 yards per attempt, only 2 big-time throws, 3 turnover-worthy plays. He does run a little bit, 135 yards. That's 2.8 yards per carry. But he has taken a decent amount of sacks. He's up to 8 on the year on a 35% pressure rate, so O-line not always doing him favors. But individually, his pressure-to-sack ratio is 21.5%, which is a little high. So you're kind of working with a game manager type at quarterback. He doesn't feel pressure really well. It's just not a difference-making position for Louisiana Tech. And then you get to the receivers. We mentioned the pressure rate being a little high. Their lead receiver is a tight end, Eli Finley, at 231 yards. Yeah, they've been without Wilkerson through most of the year, but it's just an underwhelming receiving group as a whole. And where they've kind of won is through the run game. Clay Thevenin, he's at 4.6 yards per carry, which might not seem like a lot, but he's actually achieving more than what's expected. And the same thing can be said for Amiri Wiggins, and that's kind of because their offensive line is not great. 92nd in pass blocking, 121st in run blocking. Your one redeeming quality, you faced a pretty brutal slate of defensive lines. Even the G5 teams like New Mexico State, Southern Miss, UTEP, those are not bad defensive lines. You're going to be facing one that's not the greatest here, probably the worst defensive line they faced so far. So maybe there is some room for a ceiling. But even so, like personnel-wise, Kenneth Bannister's been an absolute mess. They're rotating one of their guard positions. Roy Brackens has been a mess. He's been the replacement for Jonathan Dennis. Reporting's not great in this conference. If for whatever, I don't know if Dennis is out for the year or what he's dealing with or if he was benched or whatnot. Just no reporting. But if he comes back, he's been certainly better than Brackens. So that would help Louisiana Tech's offensive line. But bottom line, I think there might be a little room for growth because they face a lot of good defensive lines. Kennesaw State's defense is 116th, a little weaker against the pass. And they've only played one top 100 offense. That was Indiana. They allowed 8.6 yards per attempt to Merrimack, which is interesting because on paper, their 2 best players are defensive backs with Caleb Offord and Five Hamilton, who's getting more snaps. So honestly, I think the best way you beat Kennesaw State is lean on the run game, which is what Louisiana Tech wants to do anyway. For the Kennesaw State offense, they've made a QB change. I think we just see Amari Odom moving forward now. It's slowly moved his direction, and he's just been better. 72% completion percentage, 9.3 yards per attempt, 6 big-time throws, 3 turnover-worthy plays, 4.2 yards per carry, and he's only taken 5 sacks on a 30% pressure rate. It's a small sample, but he's just overall handled the entire offense a little better. And receivers have an 8% drop rate. Catching some passes would help him a little bit too. On that, I still think the receivers are pretty good. They're 84th in efficiency, which for Kennesaw State, a Conference USA team, that's pretty good. Gabriel Benyard has 363 yards after he returned from an injury. Last year, he's been good. Christian Moss, he's a P4 transfer, 206 yards. That's a pretty good receiving tandem. And they kind of need it because the run game is trailing. They're 130th. Coleman Bennett is leading the committee. A pretty lackluster one. I will say this. Having Odom involved in the run game does mitigate some of those concerns. So, yeah, they're not getting a ton out of running back, but if we could keep running Odom for 4.2 yards per carry when they need it, that is helpful. The offensive line, just not very good. They're 104th in pass blocking, 134th in run blocking. They've played against some pretty good G5 opponents too. You mentioned, or I guess we should say, the P4 teams are what they are. You're not expected to stop Wake Forest or Indiana's defensive lines. But diving into Arkansas State and Middle Tennessee, single-digit pressures in both those games. I'm really only concerned with Jadarius Lee at tackle. Otherwise, probably a slightly below average Conference USA O-line. It's not like an unmitigated disaster. And that's the biggest thing with just a frame of reference for all of these Conference USA teams. After you've played Wake Forest and Indiana, your metrics are going to look awful. What do they look like in relation to Louisiana Tech, to your opponents? And that's what's important here. I don't think Kennesaw State's offensive line is an unmitigated disaster, but they're going to have their hands full in this game. Louisiana Tech's defense has been awesome. We mentioned it holding Nussmeier in check. It hasn't all been shiny for this team. Like Logan Fife was at 8.5 yards per attempt in New Mexico State QB. Braylon Braxton was at 8.3. They have never allowed more than 4.3 yards per carry in a game, so the front is pretty good. This linebacking room, maybe one of the best in the G5. It's definitely the best in Conference USA behind Colby Fields, Mekhi Mason, and Sifo Leota. So that helps them there. And bottom line for this game, I think Louisiana Tech's defense is a difference-making unit that should be able to handle Kennesaw State's offense, which still limited, predicated on the run. And conversely, I think there is a little room for growth with Kennesaw State's defense facing another offense that's very limited. So we lean towards the under. We make this about 45.5, so not showing a ton of value. If you wanted to look at a spread in this game, it is slightly on the Kennesaw State side, but we make this right around like 6.2. So very close both ways for this team, I guess, this game. Next up, where are we headed next? Forget which one I did second. East Carolina, Tulane. All right, we're going to the AAC. Tulane is a 7-point favorite in this game. The total is 53.5, which is a little low in my opinion. We bet an over, and it largely comes down to pacing. Tulane is slow. They're not unbelievably slow. They're 108th in pace. East Carolina is unbelievably fast. They are 7th in pace, and their defense is atrocious. More on that in a little bit, but let's start resumes before we get into it. East Carolina loses to NC State, and looked like it was going to be a shootout, and then kind of stopped. It was 24-17 as the final score. They beat Coastal Carolina 38-0, lose to BYU 13-34, and then they beat Army 2 weeks ago 28-6. Kind of a misleading box score. Army had a couple wide open passes that they just dropped. It was really hard to believe. And then they had a bye last week. Tulane, meanwhile, has been up and down. They beat Northwestern in a turnover-riddled game. You had 5 Preston Stone interceptions. They beat South Alabama 33-31. That one's not quite as impressive. Beat Duke 34-24. Another turnover game, a couple turnover on downs. Very ugly for Duke. Then they get blown out by Ole Miss before beating Tulsa. So it's sort of been up and down. They look great against really good teams, look kind of bad against teams that they should be expected to win against. So it's a weird run out for Tulane. East Carolina is pretty healthy in this game. Tulane's been dealing with a few defensive line injuries. Mo Westmoreland, Jared Henderson. I'm expecting them to return, but just to be aware. For QB, Keaton Hauser's been all right. 68% completion percentage, 8.4 yards per attempt, 11 big-time throws, 9 turnover-worthy plays, and that's just it. For all the big plays you get with Hauser, you're also getting some potential interceptions, and only 4 of them have been converted to interceptions. He's only taken 4 sacks, so that's at least good. If we could just cut down the turnover-worthy plays, you'd be looking at a pretty efficient G5 quarterback in Hauser. His pass catchers are awesome. I think this is on the short list of best G5 receiving rooms with Anthony Smith. Yannick Smith's a former 4-star. Brock Spalding's been pretty good. And then they need that because the run game is just not very efficient. It's a 3-man committee led by London Montgomery. He has 209 yards. They kind of get you what you need to. They're 85th, so they're not a complete liability, but this is still an offense built through the pass game. And I'm surprised they've been this efficient. I think Hauser honestly might deserve some more credit because this O-line is awful. It might be the worst in the AAC. I guess they're calling it the American now, so excuse me. But anyway, they were expected to be awful, expected to be dead last. They've been about that. They're 124th in pass blocking, 119th in run blocking, rotating Kyle Long and Panda Askew at guard, rotating Bryce Weaver and Cooper Chernovsky at tackle. Only Emmanuel Poku's played above average for this team. It's just a bad unit. It was expected to be. Surprised they've been this efficient with this ankle weight around the offense. Tulane's defense has been disappointing. Some of it is opponent-driven. You play like Duke, Ole Miss, even Northwestern. And a lot of their efficiency metrics that are positive are driven by turnovers. It's sort of an imbalanced defense. They're 19th in pass rush, 70th in coverage, 129th in run defense. And even like Bishop Davenport in South Alabama was at 9.6 yards per pass attempt, 4.6 yards per carry. I will say they've battled injury on the defensive line. Getting back Westmoreland will be very important for this team. My one question is, why don't you just bench Dixon Agu at linebacker? He's been by far the worst player on your team, and I think it would help a lot. But I don't know. They haven't done that. So I think a defense that's sort of underachieved and maybe could be a little better if they were to make the right personnel changes, but I don't really see them doing that at this point. On the offense, Jake Retzlaff, he's taken over QB. He's done a pretty good job. 53.5% completion percentage for 6.5 yards per attempt, 2 big-time throws, 5 turnover-worthy plays. It doesn't look great on paper, but then you look at his receivers, and they have an 18% drop rate. 18%. That's nearly a quarter of his catchable targets. It's 20% almost. That is outlandish. I can't believe it is this high. These teams like Michigan, Tulane, where their receivers are doing this bad of a job, it's just like, can we get someone on the jugs machine? Like, what's going on here? Fortunately, Retzlaff is so good at running. 6.3 yards per carry, leads the team in rushing. He's only taken 5 sacks. It's been very helpful that he can do that because the run game itself is not that efficient. Javin Gordon's at 4.7 yards per carry. He's been the replacement for Maurice Turner, who they keep saying is going to come back, and he hasn't. So maybe, after a bye, perhaps he does. That would elevate the run game. But the receivers, Omari Hayes and Shaz Preston, it's a weak receiver room. And Preston should be better. This is an LSU transfer, but only 202 yards. I don't know. Maybe they used the bye efficiently and got on the jugs machine because they're leaving a lot of yards on the field. As far as the offensive line, they played a pretty tough schedule. The opposing defensive lines have been tough to evaluate. We're either looking at like underachieving Power 4 units or strong G5 units. For example, Ole Miss is really underachieved, but that's still a very talented O-line compared to what Tulane's facing in conference. And then conversely, like Tulsa's a really good G5 unit, but it's also Tulsa. I think they've done a decent job. Shadre Hurst has been great. Derek Graham has been awesome too. But the rest of this unit is kind of a mess. They're taking that entire right side, right tackle and right guard and kind of shifting it weekly. They've even moved players around positions. So I'm not really sure what they're doing on the right side. Maybe if they can figure that out, they'll be able to jump above average. But so far, they've been about that average. Fortunately, East Carolina's defense is atrocious. 9.4 yards per attempt to C.J. Bailey, 9.5 to Bear Bachmeier. They've done a decent job limiting the rest of their offenses played. But there's a major concern at every level of this defense. Poor play of linebacker is probably the biggest issue. Samuel Donka, Damian Wilson, DJ Johnson, none of them have reached average. So you can definitely score on East Carolina, which a limited Tulane offense, I'm fully expecting them to be able to do this, especially with Retzlaff's dynamic ability on the ground. I think Tulane scores with Jake Retzlaff, and honestly, they've left so many yards on the field. Maybe they can score through the air. And then East Carolina, as long as they can mitigate the Tulane pass rush, which is definitely a question, I think they should be able to score here too. They're just too talented at receiver with Caden Hauser under center. So we bet an over at 53.5. This is still available. Not my favorite bet of the week, but one that we do show value on. Jacksonville State, Sam Houston State. Back to Conference USA. Jacksonville State 7-point favorite on the road against Sam Houston State with a total of 55.5. Pretty good runoff for Jacksonville State with the coaching change. Even Rich Rod gone, this team has been impressive. You lose by 7 to UCF, who's played really well since then. You beat Liberty, and that's with an Ethan Vasco-led Liberty team, a 10-point win. Lose to Georgia Southern, a little bit inexcusable, and then you lose to Southern Miss, 42-25. That game was a lot closer than the score indicates. 4.9 yards per play to 5.3. Sorry about this, guys. Can't get through a video without it. Ambulance this time, not the cops. Good old Wednesday morning in Milwaukee. Can't wait to leave this apartment. All right. So we mentioned yards per play being pretty close. What was the reason this got out of hand? Well, it was turnovers. Jacksonville State, 4 of them. Southern Miss, 1. Coming off a bye in this game. Sam Houston State has been an unmitigated disaster since moving to Phil Longo. You change offenses entirely. You try to run an air raid. They lose to Western Kentucky, 41-24. Should have been worse. Western Kentucky gave them points on a muff punt. Lose to UNLV, probably should have been worse. They got crushed nearly by 3 yards per play. You lose to Hawaii with a backup quarterback. Texas, you were never winning that game. And then last week, New Mexico State, that was nearly a pick-em. They get blown out 37-10. Lost the turnover battle 3-1. For injuries, Jacksonville State's Jeremiah Orr on the offensive line and Aiden Thompson at linebacker. Sam Houston State's Avion Smith-Mack is out at receiver. That's a wide rotation. But their best defender, Jameer Diaz, was out of their last game too. So that's at least worth watching. For Jacksonville State, it looks like they're going to play 2 QBs. Maybe they just go to Caden Creel. Gavin Wimsatt has sort of been underwhelming, but honestly, Caden Creel's not been that much better. You look at some of the underlying metrics. You have 3 turnover-worthy plays for Wimsatt. You have 2 for Creel. Rushing-wise, Creel's been a little better at 7.5 yards per carry to Gavin Wimsatt's 5.2, but they've both been good rushers. And the pressure-to-sack ratio is a little higher for Creel than it is Wimsatt. I don't know. These guys are like interchangeable to me. You're not really looking at a huge difference for whoever plays quarterback. It's a position that's based on their running game rather than what they do through the air anyway. So it's kind of negligible difference to me. And we mentioned the run game. Quarterbacks are a big part of it. The second and third leading receiver are those 2 QBs, Wimsatt and Creel. But Cam Cook, the TCU transfer, has been awesome. He's already up to 739 combined rushing and receiving yards. That's awesome. And the receiving game here is 133rd in efficiency. I think there is some room for growth. Petaway's been injured, but you have like decent role players. Rex Steiner, I think, is pretty good for an offense like this where your QBs are limited, but he's such a big target that you could throw him jump balls and contested catches when you need to, or like when you run into a 3rd and long or something like that. So I actually don't hate the receivers, even though they've been pretty bad. 133rd in receiving efficiency is definitely not good. The offensive line has also been decent too. They played a lot of good G5 pass rushes, and right now they're really only looking at one question. There's a guard rotation between Cameron Griffin and Adrian Gum. Otherwise, pretty good G5 unit. They're 45th in run blocking, 110th in pass blocking. It's about as good as you can ask for a Conference USA unit. And they're playing a Sam Houston defense, which is awful. Now, they have played some decent Power 4 teams, but their G5 opponents, they've allowed 9.8 yards per attempt to Logan Fife and 7.9 to Maverick McIver. They've done a good job against the run. You know, like they're 62nd in run defense, 125th in coverage. But they played Western Kentucky and Hawaii. Those are 2 pass-first teams. Kentucky running a version of the air raid and Hawaii running the run and shoot. Like, what did we expect to happen? Hawaii and Western Kentucky to run all over this defense? Even like New Mexico State was having success through the air. No reason to pound them on the ground. That is a weird concern here for Jacksonville State. They're not a pass-first team, but all I'm trying to say is, yeah, they're 62nd in run defense, but I'm not really sure that adds up. They also lost their best player, Jameer Diaz. He's a defensive lineman, so we'll see if he plays in this game, but that could be an avenue for Jacksonville State to exploit. On Sam Houston's offense, they're trying to run the air raid and they don't have the personnel for it. Like Hunter Watson was never a pass-first QB last year under the KC Keeler system, and now he's at a 58.5% completion percentage, 5.6 yards per attempt, no big-time throws, 3 turnover-worthy plays, 2 interceptions. And he's taken 11 sacks on a a bad pressure rate of 36%. They're not doing him favors there. His pressure to sack ratio of 21% is a little high. His receivers have a 10% drop rate. So, he hasn't played well, but a lot has gone wrong around him. And then at times you've seen them try to bring in Mabry Matower. He's a holdover from Longo's time with Wisconsin, so they bring him in. Every time he comes in, there's something catastrophic happens. So leave Watson in the game. But how about trying to change your offense a little bit instead of running the air raid with a QB who's clearly not built for the system? But 135th in rushing efficiency, 135th in receiving efficiency. We mentioned the drop rate for this team. The two leading receivers are running backs. The leading receiver, Elijah Green, he didn't even play in their last game. This wide receiver room stinks. So why are we passing so much? The rushing game has been awful too. Watson leads the team in rushing. Part of that is their backs have been injured. They did get back Alton McCaskill, who maybe can boost them a little higher than 135th. I'm not sure. He does have 4.8 yards per carry, but this is a bad offense. The offensive line is also, they're okay. They're right around the top 100 for Conference USA. That's all right. But they have played some pretty good defensive lines. Rotating a couple positions, Michael Joseph, I'm not sure how you say that. Very weird spelling. He's been rotating with William McCollum. One thing that'll help them is they did get back their center, James Dawn, who was out for a few weeks. It's basically just him and Colt Dieterich that are above average offensive linemen. So maybe they can grow a little bit and run the ball more effectively. Hopefully Longo realizes that at some point. But Jacksonville State's defense has been quietly pretty good. Now, they have faced some pretty good offenses. Honestly, none of them have been lower than Liberty, and Liberty's 91st. Part of the reason Liberty's so low is their quarterback has been injured the last two games. I think Liberty with Vasco is even higher than 91st. So pretty good defense, or pretty good offenses faced. Taven Jackson, Ethan Vasco, JC French. They've done a decent job against them. They're all right around 8 yards per attempt. You're outmatched talent-wise, so at least it wasn't 10 yards per attempt. The defense, I think, is overachieved. Trevor Woods at the transfer at safety, Malcolm Jones, they've been very good. And then you have a couple players in your front seven that have been solid. Max Sanders at linebacker, Talon Carter at defensive tackle. This is quietly a good defense. And when you're playing a limited team like Sam Houston State, it's hard for me not to think they just don't win this matchup handedly. So brings me to the lines. We show some value on Jacksonville State. Happy this came down because now I might actually play it. We make this -9.5. So not quite in a range where I'm unloading the clip or anything, really looking to bet this game, but it's getting there. If this was 6.5, I'd probably fire. 7, we're going to have to debate it as it gets closer to kickoff. We make the total 53.3, so a little value on the under if you want to get there. Probably, honestly, just more of the Sam Houston State really put up a lot of points in this game, and I'm not sure they can do their part. So we're going to hold off for now, but the lean is Jacksonville State. Last one here. Southern Miss, Georgia Southern. Southern Miss hits the road as a 3-point favorite. 59.5 total in this game. Pacing is very good. Southern Miss is 19th. Georgia Southern is 37th. Georgia Southern has the worst defense in the country. Dead last in total efficiency. More on that in a second. But to get here, Southern Miss played admirably against Mississippi State. They lose 34-17. Then they beat an FCS Jackson State. Come out, slaughter App State. Lose to Louisiana Tech in a game that was very close. Yards per play was almost even. Just Southern Miss had the only turnover. And then they beat Jacksonville State. We mentioned the last game we talked about, the turnover difference was 4-1, which is how you get such a lopsided score. Coming off a bye now. Meanwhile, hit my desk on accident. Georgia Southern, they lose to Fresno State, play a couple difficult teams. You lose to USC, exactly what's expected to happen. Then you go out, beat Jacksonville State, beat Maine, lose to James Madison, got blown out in that game. For injuries, Aloli Maui has been out for Southern Miss. I think he might have gotten benched and not injured. He's an offensive lineman who is awful. But Jabari Ishmael on the edge is definitely an injury. Georgia Southern has been very hurt. Josh Dallas at receiver, River Helms at tight end, Kalen Williams offensive line, Latrell Bullard defensive line. At QB, Braylon Braxton's a little better than JC French. There's no way around it. He has a 65.5% completion, 7.5 yards per attempt, 13 big-time throws, 8 turnover-worthy plays. He does have 169 rushing yards, so a little bit of mobility to his game, and he's only taken 7 sacks on a 27% pressure rate. He's been a solid G5 QB, dual threat as well. His pass catchers are actually pretty good. And this is basically the whole Marshall team coming over, but your two leaders are Carl Chester and Tyshawn Chapman, who's a former four-star. They're rotating 5 or 6 receivers on any given week. So yeah, none of them really have the counting stats, but if you start adding up the top 6 receivers, you can see how productive this unit actually is. And then in the run game, it trails a little bit behind the receiving game. You have Jeffrey Pittman at 5.8 yards per carry, but guys like Robert Briggs and Matt Jones just quite haven't lived up to expectations. Braxton's actually their second leading rusher, so there is some room for this unit to grow. And this offensive line, I've been surprised. I think it's a little better than expected. They're sort of imbalanced, 35th in pass blocking, 116th in run blocking, but every defensive line they face is pretty good, including the G5 opponents. They've been kind of searching for the right combos at guard, so you'll see them rotate that position. But both the center position and both tackles have been pretty solid. So you're working with a good foundation. And you're playing the worst defense in the nation right now. They're 136th in run defense, 135th in pass rush. Yeah, they're 76th in coverage, but it doesn't matter. You can just run the ball down this team's throat. The least efficient performance is put up against Georgia Southern, where Jacksonville stayed at 5.1 yards per carry and James Madison at 6.9. Those were the least efficient. I don't even think it's worth getting into the personnel because they just don't have it. This is a bad defense and one of the worst defensive lines in the entire country. Southern Miss should run the ball right down their throat. Conversely, J.C. French, I'm surprised he got the starting nod again this year because of how erratic he is. 6 big-time throws, 6 turnover-worthy plays. They run an air raid offense, but it's a dink and dunk version of this. 6.6 yards per attempt, a 59% completion percentage. So on top of being really underneath, they're not really completing a lot of passes. Like, this is a very low completion percentage for the average depth of target. And part of that is the receivers have a 10.5% drop rate. But French, I mean, on top of the poor decision-making through the air, only 80 yards on the ground. That's 2.1 yards per carry because he's taken 10 sacks. The pressure to sack ratio is 26.5%. It's just too high. On the receivers, so Josh Dallas has been out for a while. And then you bring in Camden Brown. He's a former four-star from Auburn. He's clearly been the best receiver, but Dalen Cobb is underachieved. You just don't have any answers outside of Camden Brown. And then your run game, honestly, been more efficient than I thought. O.J. Arnold's up to 6.2 yards per carry. That's pretty good. But you just don't have enough. And the offensive line, honestly, this unit's been pretty good. 31st in pass blocking, 61st in run blocking. They've faced pretty good defensive lines outside of Fresno State. Pashawn Wimberly is the only real question at guard. Otherwise, it's been a pretty good unit. But Southern Miss's defense is one of the best G5 units they will have faced. They're 10th overall, 20th in run defense, 16th in pass rush, and 12th in coverage. Now, the offenses faced have not been that great, but I think they've held up well for the most part. You played Mississippi State. I can honestly argue they overachieved in that game, even though they gave up 34 points. Blake Baker did hit 11.4 yards per attempt, but he only threw the ball 21 times. Otherwise, they've been good in run defense. They have 2 elite edge rushers. Jamon Tapp, the Arizona State transfer, has been unbelievably talented for this level of competition. J.J. Hawkins has been great too. Here's linebackers. Michael Montgomery and Chris Jones have been solid. And your secondary honestly doesn't have a weak link. So I think you can really get after Georgia Southern with his pass rush. They can cover. And you're facing an air raid offense, which is operating underneath. So I hope they kind of sit on these routes. Maybe they can get some turnovers. We'll see on that. But we show value on Southern Miss, -3, just fine. Would have played the 3.5, but it came down. So happy with this key number. I'm not sure it goes beyond this. Seems to have met a point of resistance, but this is one we like. We actually make the total right on 59.5. Dead on. Rarely does it actually end up spot on the total. So no play there. If you forced me to pick something, it would probably be the over, but show no value at all. But that will do it for us today. Thank you guys for watching this 4-game slate. If you have a suggestion, please leave it in the comments. Otherwise, we'll be back talking. I believe it's a 3-gamer on Friday, and we'll get to the G5 greasy games the next day. Until then, we'll see you guys later, and good luck.